Hello, today we're going to teach you how to make an artificial fabric flower. For this you can use a variety of material. You can use satin, silk, and even chiffon. You can choose what color you prefer depending on the look you are trying to achieve. Artificial flowers can be used for a variety of things. You can use them, as we often use them, to adorn flower girl baskets, for example. You can also use them as embellishments for dresses and to decorate other things. This is a fairly easy rose to create, and with a little bit of patience and effort, you can have a very unique looking decor. So, to begin, you're going to take a piece of your desired fabric, and I will let you in on a little secret. You're going to need to cut a strip of fabric, but as you can see, when a fabric strip is cut along its edges, it tends to not be very elastic. In fact, it doesn't budge at all. It is very resistant and very tough, and this is simply to do with the way the threading in the fabric is situated. So instead, you're going to want to cut the fabric diagonally. As you can see, there is much more elasticity this way, and this is very essential when it comes to achieving an authentic rose look. So you want to avoid cutting strips just along the fabric, along the threading. If you cut it along the threading, you will find that you simply have a very straight and boring rose, but you want to achieve the appearance of petals, and that needs to be done only with an elastic fabric. So to begin, you're going to select the piece of fabric that you desire, and you're going to cut off any excess of the fabric. Depending on how full you want your rose to be, that will determine your length. So if you want a rose to be bigger and fuller and more voluminous, you're going to want to cut a longer strip of fabric because you're going to want to create more folds inside of the rose. So here I am cutting off a piece of fabric and removing the excess. That excess can be used to create smaller roses, or it can be used for additional detailing. Then I'm going to begin and cut a strip of the fabric diagonally. When it comes to determining the width, you want the width to be approximately 6 to 7 centimeters. You do want a considerable width. You don't want the piece of fabric to be too small because that will make it a little bit difficult to work with. So about 6 to 7 centimeters is about right. Then you take a pair of your fabric scissors and you cut off a strip of the fabric. So this is the strip of the fabric that we will be working with. One thing you need to note is when you fold the fabric in on itself, as we will be doing, and you're using an edge of the fabric, you can tell that the edge is actually very straight. It is not very folded, it's not very wavy. And what we want is we want to create that ruffled, wavy, folded strip look, because that's what will allow us to achieve the petal look. So you're going to fold the strip. However, ensuring you leave a piece of fabric or a reservoir between the fold and the rest of the fabric. And this should be about 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters. This little reservoir space of fabric is very important. So do not just simply fold the fabric perfectly in half. Make sure that you have this reservoir. So next I'm going to be taking my sewing machine, and this is very fast, easy, and efficient if you're a person that is familiar with sewing or own a sewing machine. If you do not, you can hand stitch this. So I am removing any excess fabric, folding the fabric, making sure I have a little bit of a reservoir, and feeding it into the machine. So the way I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to use one hand to feed the fabric into the machine and another hand to tug on it downwards, creating a tension. And what these two seemingly opposing movements do is that they create this ruffle look. So as you can see, I am feeding it into the machine and pulling it down as well. The bottom piece of the fabric is being pulled down. As you can see, the bottom portion of the fold. And this creates that ruffled look. As you can see, my thumb and finger is tucked into the back portion of the fold, and my other finger is feeding it into the machine. If you're someone that is familiar with sewing or own a sewing machine, this process is fairly simple and straightforward. And if you're not, you will have the option to also hand stitch. As you can see, this technique creates a ruffled, wavy look. And this is the effect that we want to achieve. When you are finished, cut off any excess. And this is the final product. As you can tell, it's very wavy. It's almost spiral in nature, and this will allow you to create a very authentic, a very soft rose-like texture when you are crafting your rose. If you do not own a sewing machine, or if you're simply uncomfortable with sewing, you can always hand stitch this strip as well. It's the same principle. You fold in the upper portion of the strip into the other portion of the strip, making sure that you have a little bit of space between the fold and the remaining of the fabric. So you want to ensure you have that little reservoir. And then you simply hand sew. What you want to do is you want to keep about a thumb and a half space between each stitch. And when you pull on a thread, you will see that they start to kind of crumple up and get closer together. And this is what's going to create that same sewing machine effect that you've seen. So I take a piece of fabric and I fold and pierce it, and I create the stitch, making sure that there is quite a bit of space between each stitch. Like I said, about a thumb and a half to 2 thumb length. When you tug on the string, you want to see the fabric start to ruffle up. And this is what will give you a very authentic looking rose. This can usually take a little bit of time, so be patient, but don't worry too much if your stitching is imperfect. The most essential component is achieving that look. When you have completed and reached the end, simply secure your needle and thread and tighten up the thread. As you can see, you have created the exact same ruffled strip the way you would have done on a sewing machine. So now we're going to begin crafting the rose. We're going to take the outside edge, and there are usually loose threads that peer through. You're going to take that edge and you're going to tuck it in. And you want this portion to be a little bit tighter because you're essentially creating the bud of the rose. So if you look at a rose naturally, the inside tends to be a little bit more tight as the petals around it open up. So that is exactly the same visual you are recreating here. And this is where the reservoir becomes key, because as you can see, I am stitching through that piece of remaining fabric. That is what I'm using to secure. And you want to make sure that every fold you create is secured by your needle and thread. This will make sure that the flower does not come undone or loosen up. So carry on and proceed with your rose and the design, ensuring that every time you fold the rose and create a new layer, you secure it with your needle and thread. So the bud, or the inside of the rose, is a little bit tighter, with the outside petals a little bit looser. If you want your rose to be bigger and fuller, you can cut a longer strip for the beginning of the rose when you are selecting your fabric. If you want it to be smaller, you can just simply create a shorter strip. As you can see here, we're going for a little bit more of a full rose, and the more fabric that you have, the more petals and layers you can create with your fabric. And this is what the rose will look like. As you can tell, there's quite a bit of loose fabric that you will use a needle and thread and secure it all together, pulling it in. Secure it at the base of the rose with your needle and thread, and this will be invisible, so you don't have to worry too much about perfection. You just want to ensure that any loose piece of fabric is nice and tightly secured to the base of your rose. And here we have an edge that has not been secured, and we're going to save that for last. And we're going to tuck it in and secure it to the rose with an invisible stitching technique. Go over it one more time with a needle and thread. And then take the remaining edge, tuck it inward, and use your needle and thread to secure it to the head of the rose. This is where you should be a little bit more gentle and a little bit more careful, because it is going to be a visible part of the rose, so make sure that you're stitching this carefully with an invisible stitch. And then you can take a rhinestone or a gemstone and put it in the center. However, I like these little strips of small beads. These give it a more authentic look. If you've ever seen a rose in full bloom, you can see that the inside of the rose sometimes has these little wispy bits, the core of the rose. So I prefer this. You can find these at any local craft store, but of course you're not limited to them, and you can use whatever embellishment you like at the center of your rose. That is entirely up to you. Here I'm simply using a glue gun, and I'm making sure I'm spreading the inside of the rose with my finger so that I do not touch any of the surrounding fabric with the glue. And then you're going to put it into the rose. And that is what the finished result will look like. Once that is complete, you can use it, for example, to embellish a flower girl basket. Here we're using an artificial rose and the petals that come with an artificial rose. And we'll just break off a couple. Usually there are plenty on the stem of an artificial rose, so it's not a tremendous loss. And we're going to trim it down and secure it with a hot glue gun. Put it directly on the fabric. All of that hot glue gun will be hidden beneath the rose, so don't worry too much. So secure it quite well and then place your rose on top of it. Give it a couple of seconds to dry. And this is what it's going to look like. However, sometimes you may wish to secure it an additional time with a needle and thread. This would just simply add an additional layer of security, and it will allow your rose to be firmly placed on the basket. So if you are giving this to a small child and they are waving the basket around, you are not going to be concerned about any of the embellishments falling off. So take a needle and thread and go over it one more time. But before you do this, make sure that the glue has dried, because it might be a little bit difficult to stitch and the glue is going to stick to your needle and thread. Simply attach the rose to the basket. This is the final result. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned how to create fabric flowers. You can, of course, use any type of fabric, any color, and you can create your own fabric rose. And this is what the final result looks like. You are not limited to baskets, but you can use it for a flower girl basket, or you can use it as an embellishment on any other piece or dress, or however you like. Again, thank you so much for watching, and good luck with your creation.